Solomon has to teach us. We'll start with verse 1. It says, "Again I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. And I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is the one who has never been born, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun." There was an article in a Kentucky newspaper that ran several years ago, and the guy had to say, this is what the guy had to say, is that I used to think I was poor. Then they told me I wasn't poor, I was needy. Then they told me it was self-defeating to think of myself as needy, that I was culturally deprived. Then they told me that deprived was a bad image, that I was underprivileged. Then they told me that underprivileged was overused, that I was disadvantaged. I still don't have a dime, but I have a great vocabulary. You know, there are words that come into fashion, like I said, phrases that go out and come in and out. And there are words as well. And a word comes in and it's used, and then I guess it gets overused. And so they want to change it because they want to define it. And in Ecclesiastes 4, Solomon deals with the word that's been used a lot recently, and that's the word oppressed. You know, it's an issue that frustrates most people. You know, the oppressed are those who have been wronged and exploited, and they can't find any help. Really, it's an issue of unfairness. You know, things just aren't the way they should be. But that's life, is it not? Things are not fair in this life. There are some who never seem to get what they deserve. And then there are others who have more than they need and never really seem to have to work for it. They just got it. They just received it. They have advantages that others don't have. Life, my mother used to tell me, is unfair. If we'd go and tell her that's not fair when she did something, you know, she had two responses. One was, all right, so who are you going to tell? You going to call your mama? And then the other one was, well, life's not fair. Just get used to it. Life's not fair. You know, we know that life's not fair. We didn't have to read the book of Ecclesiastes to realize that life's not fair. Again, some people don't get what they deserve, and some people get more than what they deserved. And so Solomon's looking out over life. He's looking out over the people around him, and he's seeing the unfairness of life, how some are oppressed, and he lamented over the situation. There didn't seem to be anyone who was willing to come along and help those who needed help, to care for the powerless. Who was coming to their aid? Now, we instinctively want things to be fair. That's why we have umpires at a ball game, or referees, right? We want things to be fair. We want the rules to be called fairly. That's the reason we have judges in a court. We want things to be fair, but it isn't always fair. Life is unfair. You know, Jesus noted the unfairness of life when he said in John 12, verse 8, he says, "You will always have the poor among you." There's just always going to be poor. And while that's true, we're still called to help those who can't help themselves. We're called to help the poor. Now, what seems funny about Solomon's observation is he seems to be the one that's helping to make people poorer. He's the king. He's the one who's oppressing some of these people. And he had the position, his position was he could have made things better. He could have helped. But he was actually adding to the oppression. In 1 Kings 12, after Solomon's death, the leaders of Israel come to Solomon's son, who is now king, Rehoboam, and they ask him for help. 1 Kings 12, verse 4. It says, "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Solomon was one of those oppressing the needy, and then he's complaining about it. High taxes were adding to their problems that they were experiencing. They needed someone to come along and plead their case, but they had no one. Now, we also need to remember that the law system that they were under is the one that God gave them. If there was ever a perfect law system, they had it. It came from God. God gave it to them through Moses. God's law system saw to it that the poor were provided for. And it's just amazing to read through the law and see how God was able to do that. God saw to it that those in power didn't take advantage of those without power. The problem was they weren't following God's law. They didn't do the things that God said to do, to take care of the poor, to make sure the disadvantaged weren't taken advantage of. And so the result was a perversion of justice, and the poor suffered. So after acknowledging this, it gets a little dark. Solomon suggests it would be better if these people had just never been born. Right? It'd be better if we'd all never been born than have to witness or experience the injustice and oppression of the world around us. Now, that may be extreme, but, we understand what he's saying. But what Solomon is explaining is what life is like, what he says is under the sun. Here's what life is like under the sun. In other words, here's what life is like without God. Without God, there is oppression. Without God, if you're ignoring God, you're ignoring his commands, there's going to be difficulties. People are going to be taken advantage of. Apart from God, there is no hope. If there is no God, then this is all that there is to life, and there's no point of ever being born. We'd be better off not being born than to suffer. But we know that Solomon is leaving God out of the equation. With God, things are completely different. Because it is God. It is our hope in God and the promises he's made that give us meaning and purpose and peace and contentment. We have life worth living because of God. We know that God is right and just, that we can trust him. Under the sun without God, there's no justice. But under God, there is complete righteousness and justice. He continues in verse 4, he says, I saw all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Now there's a difference of opinion on how verse 4 should be translated, and if you look at different translations, you'll find one of two things. Either Solomon is saying that we look at people who have achieved, who've worked hard and had success, and we're envious of them. Or he's saying we work hard and succeed because we envy others. So who's doing the envying? And in the Hebrew, it's kind of hard to tell, right? Really, I think both are true. There are people who look at others and the success of others and are envious of what others have done. And then there are those who work hard only because they are envious. It's that envy, that desire to do better than others, right, that drives them. Jesus said we need to rejoice with those who rejoice and be happy with those who do well. Not being envious of what others have. Envy shouldn't drive us one way or the other. You may be familiar with the story of the bucket full of crabs This bucket's got crabs in it, and they're trying to get out. And one finally reaches the top and is getting ready to pull himself out and escape. And another crab grabs him and drags him back down. There goes his escape. You know, that unfortunately is how people can be. Not everyone wants you to succeed. Some people are envious if you do well. They don't know how to rejoice with those who rejoice. We should work hard, but not just so we can keep up with the Joneses or surpass them, do even better than. You know, we're to work hard because that is what God has given us to do. All right? So some work hard so they can do better than others. Others are just envious. And Solomon describes this extreme in verse 5 and 6. He says, "Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Better one handful with tranquility than 2 handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind." Now, in the Bible, in Solomon's wisdom literature, folding of the hands is a picture of being lazy, right? So you can just picture somebody with their hands folded. You know, how much work are you going to get done when your hands are folded? It's hard to get much done, right? You got to unfold your hands in order to work. So on one hand, you have those who work hard out of envy. On the other hand, you have those who see others are successful and you say, forget it. You know, they've got advantages I don't have. I'm just not even going to try. And Solomon says the result is their ruin. But Solomon wrote about such people in Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 24, beginning with verse 30, he says, "I went past the field of a sluggard, past the vineyard of someone who has no sense. Thorns had come up everywhere. The ground was covered with weeds, and the stone wall was in ruins. I applied my heart to what I observed and learned a lesson from what I saw. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man." He says laziness is like a thief. You don't work hard, you just sit around doing nothing, it's going to take everything that you own. And so Solomon suggests moderation, right? You don't have to kill yourself working so that you get more than everybody else, but you do need to work. We don't need to work out of envy, but neither should we sit back and do nothing. Again, in Proverbs, Solomon wrote Proverbs 23, verses 4 and 5. He says, "Do not wear yourself out to get rich. Do not trust your own cleverness. Cast but a glance at riches, and they are gone, for they will surely sprout wings and fly off to the sky like an eagle." You ever seen that happen to the money? It just seems to fly away from you. Doesn't matter what you do, it just seems to go away. And so he says moderation is better than envy. Moderation is better than being lazy. All right, picking back up with verse 7. It says, "Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil. Yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. 'For whom am I toiling?' he asked. 'And why am I depriving myself of enjoyment?' This too is meaningless, a miserable business." Ty Cobb was born in Georgia. He was nicknamed the Georgia Peach and was a royalty in baseball. He may have been, some say, the greatest baseball player ever. His lifetime batting average is still has the record. You know, he still has the record for the highest lifetime batting average. And when he retired in 1928, he had more than 70 different records, more than 70 different baseball records, many of which he still holds to this day. He retired after 21 years with the Detroit Tigers and a couple of years with the Philadelphia Athletics. Now, at that time, Cobb was by far the most exciting player of the era. When the Hall of Fame, Baseball Hall of Fame was established in 1936, he was the first player voted in. But Cobb was also very controversial. He got into fights on and off the field. He was accused of being overly aggressive. Even his supporters acknowledged that he was a fierce competitor. He always wanted more victories, more championships. However, in his desire to achieve more and to do better than anyone else, he ended up pushing everyone away. When Ty Cobb died, he had what would be the equivalent today of about $200 million. So he did okay financially. But at his funeral, only 3 friends attended. That's not even enough to carry in the casket. He didn't have any friends because he ran them all off. You know, it was a lonely death because he lived a lonely life. And Solomon talks about the man who lives alone, works alone. What benefit is it to him? He's earned this great wealth, but what good does it really do him? And where is this wealth going to go when he dies? You know, when we think about it, we don't work for ourselves. We work for others. We work for our family members. You know, I don't just work so I can eat. I work so my wife can eat, and when my children are at home, so they could eat, right? Work to clothe them. I work for our families and our children. There was a man in a small town who had died, and his daughter was making funeral arrangements, and she went to find some clothes for him, right, for the burial. And she walked past a men's store. We used to have such a store in Elizabethton when I first moved here, right? That's where you went. If you wanted some nice clothes, they had nice suits, nice shirts and ties and shoes. And so she went in and she started looking around. And because it was a small town, the owner of the store recognized her and knew her father well. And she started looking around for something that she might get for him, but she really didn't see anything. She commented, "You have beautiful clothing here, nice suits and ties and shirts and shoes." And then she shook her head and said, "But you know, my father was a very plain man. My father would never have wanted any clothing like this. He never spoke about it, never mentioned clothing. When I grew up, I realized that my dad was just a very modest dresser and never wanted fancy clothes like this." And then the owner of the store said, "You didn't know your father very well, did you?" Said he used to come in here all the time, and he would look at the clothes. He would touch the silk shirts, the ties, he would look at the shoes. Your father loved nice clothing, but he never had any because he made sure you had some. That's it, isn't it? And she understood, and she agreed that he took care of them. He didn't buy nice stuff for himself because he bought it for his wife and children. Solomon wrote Proverbs 13:22, "A good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children, but a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous." That's the purpose of our labor. We work hard for others. If we work hard only for ourselves, we'll end up like Ty Cobb. No friends and lonely. We need others. We need to live for others. And Solomon illustrates this when he says, beginning with verse 9, he says, "Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Jonathan Pokluda tells about flying to Colorado. He had a speaking engagement. He was going to preach at this event. So he arrived at the airport and got a rental car, and started driving towards the event. And he said he had driven an hour or so, and he realized he needed to go to the bathroom, but that he hadn't seen a building in miles, right? There was no place to stop. And he hadn't seen another car for miles. So he decided he'd just get out, walk into the woods, find a tree, right? Lots of trees, walk a little bit off the road, and he would go. But it said as soon as he stepped off the road, he sank into the snow. And he said the more he began to struggle to get out of the snow, the further he sank, and he eventually ended up chest deep in snow. He was getting wet, he was freezing, and he really thought that was going to be it. This is how I'm going to die. They'll find me in the spring, all the snow will be gone, and they'll find my dead, lifeless body on the side of the road. Right? He figured that would be it. Well, of course he didn't die, because he's telling the story. He did eventually make it out, but he said it wasn't very easy. He says, reflecting back on that event, he said there would have been one thing that would have made it less scary. Can you guess what it is? A friend. If he'd had somebody there with him, right? Because the friend could have helped pull him out of the snow. A friend would have been there to encourage him, lend him a hand. It would have made the situation much easier to handle. And that's what Solomon is saying in these verses. Now, I was talking to a friend this last week who made the comment that he just doesn't like asking people for help. He doesn't want to inconvenience them. Well, I understand the sentiment. But at one time or another, we all need help. We can't do everything on our own. We need help, especially if you're sick and not feeling good. And he said he hadn't been feeling good for a month. I said, well, call. I don't like asking for help. You needed help. You need to call. Right? There are just times when we need someone to come alongside us and do for us what we can't do for ourselves. And Solomon talks about the dangers of isolation and the benefits of friendship. Do you remember the first time in the Bible that God said that something wasn't good? It's in Genesis chapter 2. God created Adam and then said, it's not good for him to be alone. And he created Eve. Adam needed a helper. Right? There are advantages to having a relationship with other people, and that's what Solomon is saying. 2 people can do more. They can work more. What 2 people can do and earn is greater than what the 2 would earn separately by themselves. It's not just 1 + 1 = 2, it's 1 + 1 = 3. Right? When they work together, they can do more. If there are 2 people and one falls, the other can help him up. If it's cold, they can stay warm. If they're attacked, they can defend themselves better than just one. There are just some benefits of having someone with you. About a decade ago, Microsoft built what has now been called the world's quietest room. There was another quiet room, I think it was in Michigan, Minnesota, I don't remember, somewhere up north. And that was the quietest. Now Microsoft has the quietest room. Those who have entered it say that if you stay there long enough, and it doesn't take very long, you will soon begin to hear your own heartbeat. And if you move, you can hear the joints and ligaments as you move. Eventually, they say you lose your balance because you're not having any sound that's echoing back so you can get kind of a sense of where you are. It's all taken away. Now, while there have been a few people who've been able to stay in the room for more than a half hour, no one's made it an hour. And most people don't make it to 15 minutes, right? They go in, and a couple of minutes later, yeah, I'm ready, I want out. It's been said the cruelest punishment is isolation, being alone, right? We aren't made to be alone. We are created. God created us for community. We need each other. Now, Solomon then talks about 3 strands being stronger than 2. Now, we might expect him to say 2 strands are better than 1, right? I mean, he's been talking about 2 people, right? 2 people can work more, they can help each other up, they can keep each other warm, they can defend each other. 2 people. But he gets down to the end of this section and he says, but 3 strands are better. What is the 3rd strand? Well, it's commonly understood that the 3rd strand is God. A relationship intertwined with God. God being that 3rd strand is not quickly broken. And this verse is often applied to marriage. The husband and wife might have a good marriage, but the best marriages are those who build their relationship with God. It is putting God first and loving Him more that allows a husband and a wife to love each other better. One young man told his girlfriend they were thinking about getting married. He hadn't proposed yet, but they had started talking about it. And they were getting serious, and so he told her, says, Marie, before there was a Marie, there is a Jesus. And if Marie is no longer with me, there will still be Jesus. He's the one that I love, and that will make me a better husband for you. Now, if you don't understand that, that might sound a little cruel, but it's the truth. That's how it works. Every couple has disagreements, but when you walk with Jesus, those disagreements aren't the end of the relationship, right? They're not going to divide you. If we love Jesus more, we build our lives around God, then our relationships, our marriages will be stronger. Verse 13. Better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to heed a warning. The youth may have come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were there before him. But those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Now, I wonder if Solomon wasn't in some ways describing himself here, except that he wasn't born in poverty, right? His dad's the king. He had all that he wanted. Before he was born, there was all that he needed. Now, this Bible doesn't tell us specifically, but I think that's who he was talking about. There were some, or I'm sorry, Solomon was 20 years old when he became king. And the Bible doesn't tell us how old he is. It's just kind of a guess, but he's about 20 years old when he becomes a king. Now, there were some kings in Israel who were younger than that, not many, but think about becoming king at the age of 20. I mean, that's a lot of responsibility for such a young age to be on the throne. Solomon became one of the most powerful kings. He was certainly the most powerful king in that region. Other kings and queens traveled miles to come and see Solomon. Think, for example, of Queen Sheba, who came to visit him. And so Solomon understood the saying that it's lonely at the top. Right? He is at the top. And who else is there to share that with? And his summation is that it's better to be poor and wise and young than to be old and foolish, to have great wealth and status, but to be old and foolish. Now, why does Solomon say that the people cheer for this new young king? Well, it's probably because they're tired of the old foolish king. But he says, here's the way it works. You've got this king and he grows older and the people get tired of him and this new guy comes along. Even if he came out of prison, he's young, and so we're gonna cheer for him. Right? It seems to be really kind of prophetic. Because as I mentioned earlier, after he died and Rehoboam became king, the leaders came to Rehoboam and said, would you reduce the taxes? And what did Rehoboam say? No. You think my father taxed heavily. Just wait till I get a chance. It's going to be even worse. And so the northern 10 tribes left. We don't want anything to do with you. And they left and they formed their own country, Israel. And then they got for a king a man who had been exiled by Solomon. They brought him in. He may as well have been in prison, and they made him king. He was young, he was exciting, and he was very popular. But guess what happens if you're young? One day you become old. He became old, and they didn't want him anymore, and they chose a new and younger king, right? Popularity is fleeting. It doesn't stay around. Winston Churchill was at a gathering, and he was introduced, and he received a standing ovation before he even went up to speak. And a woman sitting next to him said, "Mr. Churchill, it must be very rewarding to get such an applause by so many people." And Churchill replied, "Madam, if this was my hanging, the crowd would have been twice the size." So much for being popular, right? Popularity comes and it goes. If our goal is to be popular, then we need to watch out. We need to be careful. Jesus warned in Luke chapter 6, verse 26. "Woe to you when everyone speaks well of you, for this is how their ancestors treated the false prophets." They spoke very well of the false prophets, but they weren't worth anything, right? And so we shouldn't make it our goal. And so King Solomon describes, right, how popular a new ruler is. But when that newness wears off, they're ready for another guy, a new, younger man who will be more popular, and they make him king, right? You just can't please everybody. Sooner or later, people will become displeased, even with the new successor, and they're going to pick somebody else. It's just this vicious cycle. Popularity out of popularity. Popularity, right? It just comes and goes. And so someone who's seen today as hot snot on a silver platter, as my brother used to say, will one day become cold boogers on a paper plate, right? You're hot today, tomorrow it's gone. Maybe I shouldn't have shared that one. All right, anyway, too late now. Popularity comes, but it goes just as quickly. And so Solomon recognizes this, and he wonders, well, then what's the point? Y'all were excited with me yesterday, and today you're ready for somebody new. And so he says it seems like a chasing after the wind. Have you ever tried to pick up a piece of paper you dropped on the ground, and just as your fingers are ready to grab it, the wind blows it away? And then you go chase it down, and you almost get to it, and it blows it another 5 feet, right? Chasing after the wind. He says chasing after popularity is like chasing after the wind. It's just a waste of time. A church group took a mission trip to Haiti. And when they arrived, the group was just shocked at the abject poverty in which the people lived. Most of the people there had very little as far as personal property went. You know, if they had enough to fill a suitcase, they were doing pretty good. They lived in small homes that were smaller than what we would call a small bedroom, right? They were small. They didn't have a lot. There was little food. There was little work that a person could do to earn money. You know, most people in the U.S. would look on those in Haiti, even still, and pity them because they just don't have a lot. When one of the leaders of the group made mention of this poverty to the Haitian preacher there, the preacher replied, there are people in this world that say we are poor people here, but no one is poor who has Jesus. You know, the leader noted that while they didn't have a lot, certainly by the world standards, you know, that they knew Jesus. And because of that, they were happy. They were cheerful. They were smiling because they loved Jesus and knew that Jesus loved them. And that's what we need. The world is difficult. We know that. It's not fair. We understand. It can be difficult. There's injustice and oppression. And so we need friends to help us as we go along. You know, those who don't think they need help because they're on top of the world will soon find out the world has turned. And they're going to be on the bottom. What stays constant is God's love for us. We need God. That's what we really need to hold on to. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you. We thank you for friends and family and Lord, for the help that we receive. But Lord, we thank you most for your love that you show to us in Jesus. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen. Won't you stand and we'll sing our closing song. Jesus is tenderly calling you home, calling today, calling today. Why from the sunshine of love